Well, this week the ANZ Bank said it thinks the price of carbon offsets on the markets could double this year because of demand as businesses like yours need to buy those offsets. But that'll also increase the price of freight on your rail service, which to me just seems a bit nuts.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Ross. I mean, we remain fairly cost competitive compared to road, although in many occasions we are slower, and that's why we've been advocating for so long for governments to invest in not only the resilience of our rail network but extra capacity so that the mode shift is possible. So the way it currently stands though is we will have to invest in carbon offsets. That will add further cost to our transport, and that will be passed through to the end consumer, and it affects people who buy their goods from Woollies and Coles and Aldi. And again, we're not asking to be let off the hook in terms of our obligations. In fact, we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars to become even more efficient, despite the fact that we are up to 8 times more efficient than road already. We're investing in 50 new environmentally friendly locomotives, 4.7 kilometres long, full of double stack possible well wagons that make it even more efficient. So it's not as if we want to be let off the hook here, Ross. We just want to make sure that the cost impost on all transport operators are levelly applied, equally applied.
Okay, so if I'm thinking about this, Paul, I'm a small trucking operator. I don't get caught by the safeguard mechanism because I'm not considered to be a big emitter, so I don't get the extra cost. But your company, Pacific National, is considered to be a big emitter, so you end up having to pay this cost. So that could tip the balance back in favour of more road transport, which defeats the whole purpose of the exercise.
Yeah, that's exactly our point, Ross. We think it's well intended but poorly applied, and it's not done on a per unit basis, which it should be. And because the rail industry here, particularly the freight rail industry here, is quite concentrated to a small number of players, in total, the number of, or the tonnes that are emitted in total are enough for us to be captured in the rail industry in the safeguard mechanism. But on a per unit basis, the trucking industry, because it's a lot more fragmented, has not been caught up and doesn't have the extra impost or the extra scrutiny over it that rail is about to get through the safeguard mechanism. It just doesn't make sense to me that when everybody knows that freight rail is more efficient, more environmentally friendly and safer, that the decisions that are being made actually work at odds with that reality.
But you've already got out there your own ESG report looking at ways you can reduce your own carbon dioxide output. So there's a plan to do that regardless, but that doesn't seem to be acknowledged by the politicians.
We agree entirely, Ross. We have long advocated for rail as one of the major solutions for the ambitions of our country towards net zero in 2050. And we have known, as I've said, that we are more carbon efficient as it stands today, but we're not resting on our laurels. We have to do our bit to become even more carbon efficient in the rail sector. And so we are doing that. But it just doesn't make sense to have more hurdles thrown in front of us that make it harder to get that mode shift going. We have long advocated for an increased grant funding to make sure there's more capacity and resilience for the rail freight network. Already, rail freight can only get access, and rail track is only invested in if it can completely cover its cost and become a profit centre for the government. No road network actually has that requirement. So right at the very beginning, when you're thinking about road funding versus rail funding, the playing field is skewed already. And this is just one more example of where the intention to move to a more efficient mode is actually being hindered by the reality of what the policy is.
So, Paul, a really dumb question. Why is it that the politicians just haven't listened to you when they've made these amendments to the safeguard mechanism?
Well, you'd have to ask the politicians that. I think in theory, capturing the 200 top emitters from a gross emissions point of view does make sense at the headline level. But what has been completely missed here is the concentration of the task of hauling freight across the country to a small number of large companies versus a very fragmented trucking industry. And so the per unit analysis has been completely missed in this. You'd have to ask the politicians why, but we continue to state that case. Having said all of that, Ross, we also support the trucking industry as a big part of the supply chain. So this is not about imposing more penalties on trucking. This is about making sure that there's an equal and level playing field for everybody in our supply chain.
Paul Scurrah, good to chat to you today. Many thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ross.